So last week we discussed Yavin 4 and the Rebel base on Yavin 4, so I figured this week was a great opportunity to discuss where they ended up after that. Let's talk about Echo Base on Hoth and how the Rebels established that outpost. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So, like we discussed with both Endor and Yavin, one of the big advantages to Hoth was how remote it was. Hoth itself is a barren wasteland, a frozen planet at the time of the Star Wars movies, although it is described that that planet is in the midst of an ice age, so likely it wasn't always this cold and won't be this cold forever, but for the relevant stretch of time within the Star Wars universe, it's a frozen, desolate wasteland, which makes it a pretty good candidate for hiding a secret base, but furthermore, it's in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing significant on Hoth. Hoth's history basically starts with the Rebel Alliance stumbling on that planet. We know a little bit about the days before the founding of Echo Base, so let's discuss a bit about that. So for a long time, pirates had tried to establish outposts on Hoth for the same reasons the Rebels would end up there. It's remote, it's hard to find, but it is very near a fairly minor hyperspace route that could be used as a gateway to the rest of the galaxy. So it had good access to the rest of the galaxy, but the planet itself and the system it was in was of no note to authorities, meaning whether you're pirates or a rebellion, it's gonna take a bit for an adversarial state to find you there. However, there are definitely challenges with Hoth, as we see during The Empire Strikes Back. The planet is remarkably cold and very hostile to all life that didn't evolve in that environment. So many of the pirate groups that tried to establish base camps on Hoth found the environment to simply be unsuitable and would abandon their base camp fairly early. This is how it ended up on the radar for the Rebel Alliance, who were working with a lot of these smugglers who did consider base camps on Hoth. And when the Rebel Alliance needed a new base, not just after the Battle of Yavin, but after a short period of time hopping from small base to small base and maintaining a large fleet, the Rebels ultimately settled on Hoth as the best option. So for all those reasons, Hoth seemed like the perfect base. It was out of the way, but not so out of the way that it would be hard for them to reach the rest of the galaxy to continue fighting their guerrilla-style war against the Empire. In fact, it actually really lends itself well to hit-and-run attacks, because you can send your fighters off into that nearby minor hyperspace lane, and they could be on the other side of the galaxy within a few hours, do their strike, and then return home, slinking back into nothing, into the void of space around that hyperspace lane to just show up on Hoth, a planet that, by the way, is not on most galactic maps. So the Rebels did the thing that the pirates were simply unable to do, and it's likely because the Rebel Alliance did have a significant amount of resources backing them up by this point. After all, in the few years since the Battle of Yavin, the Empire's grip has started to slip, and many powerful organizations had sort of sided, whether officially or unofficially, with the Rebel Alliance. So they had some serious help in basically founding an operation in this incredibly hostile environment, carving Echo Base out of nearby mountainsides and creating a large series of caves and caverns that could serve as a new command base for the Rebel Alliance. Now, in the time between the Battle of Yavin and the establishment of Echo Base, the Rebels had lost some of their leaders, including General Dodonna, who was the leader of the Rebel Alliance from a military standpoint at the time of the Battle of Yavin, who had since perished. In fact, he was the one that found Hoth and added it to the list of possible Rebel base locations before his death. That list, which was ultimately honored following his loss, and that's how they ended up with the base on Hoth. Eventually, it did become the primary operating base for the Rebel Alliance. After all, like I said, nice, easy, hidden position near a major strategic artery that could be used to send your vessels around the galaxy. Ultimately, Hoth did pose its own challenges, once again, the hostile environment, but also the wildlife on Hoth was either incredibly helpful, like the Tauntauns, which were a nice, easy mode of transportation, or the Wampas, which were a constant threat and did threaten to overwhelm Rebel facilities on several occasions. There's a few other interesting tidbits that did help with hiding Hoth from Imperial scanners. A big one was the asteroid belt that was near Hoth around its star. The asteroids made the approach to Hoth rather difficult, especially for large capital ships, which the Empire is incredibly reliant on, but it also meant that Hoth was regularly the victim of asteroid impacts, which would fall into the atmosphere, impacting the ground and creating a heat signature, which looks fairly similar to the heat signature that would be present from a civilized operation there, like, say, the construction of a rebel base or the operation of a rebel base, and that meant that any Imperial scans that happened to look at the planet and noticed heat signatures would likely write them off as recent asteroid impacts and not investigate them any further, making it even easier to hide something like the massive installation that was Echo Base. But that base didn't hide forever, and eventually it was overwhelmed by an Imperial invasion in the Battle of Hoth. If you'd like to learn about how the Battle of Hoth played out and how Echo Base ultimately fell, I'll leave a link up here to my battle analysis on the Battle of Hoth and how the Empire ultimately evicted the Rebel Alliance from the Hoth system. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think Hoth is a good site for a Rebel base. Do you think it makes sense to have your base of operation in such a hostile location, or do you think they really should have picked somewhere that was easier to operate out of, even if it would have made the base a little bit easier to detect? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars or anywhere else in science fiction, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.